the house, nobody can tear it down. If the Lord builds the house, nobody can tear it down. When it's built on His name, there's nothing gonna shake this ground. If the Lord builds the house, nobody can tear it down.
God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you today. Through the reading of your word, through this message, through our prayers. Amen. So last weekend we had a meeting of some youth and children's parents on a Zoom call last Sunday night. And during that meeting, one person said something that stuck with me. She said, it seems we're not all that great at follow through and consistency at Kingstowne. And I thought, because it was a variety of things we were talking about that came up. It seems like we're not all that great at follow through and consistency at Kingstowne. And I'm thinking, ouch, you're right. But the other feeling I had when I heard that was like, it's because we all want to do so much. We all hunger, we long for so many things, right? It's that hunger that we all have. Hunger's not bad, like the hunger to be a part of everything. It's the FOMO, maybe that's what we can call it, FOMO. Do you know the feeling when you are like really hungry? It starts as like this state, this sense of appetite, a feeling that could really, it could use just a little bit of something, but then maybe just snack will do, but then like if you don't get a snack, then it grows. And if you've got no way of finding something to fill the hunger at the moment, it quickly becomes this ache in your stomach, and your concentration begins to waver. Is this right? Is this how you feel when you're hungry? Yeah. And it starts to be difficult to do ordinary things at that moment, right? It starts to be difficult to do just the basic things. And so you begin to seek out distractions to keep you from thinking about the hunger. It quickly becomes an ache in a stomach, and you have no more concentration, and you need something to take your attention away and enable you to lose yourself in something, so you can't think of the hunger anymore. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. You start to doubt your own judgment at this point, and you realize you're becoming incredibly kind of selfish and self-absorbed at the moment, because all you can think about, all you can feel is the hunger. Because you find yourself so mesmerized by your own desperation in that moment that you can't consider anything else, anyone else, any other person's need. And finally, when you do find food, when you get to eating after you've been that hungry after a long period of time, it's not even all that enjoyable when you do find it. That yearning and ache, like that pain that you felt, that you wanted to go away, it prevents you from actually enjoying the food or savoring it when you actually do get to eating it. You like greedily wolf it down because your body has taken over, and the rest of you has been kind of elbowed aside in order to deal with that sense of hunger. Hunger has this way of draining all the joy because you're just left with raw, voracious craving and compulsion to fill it. We don't want to see ourselves like this. It's not just the physical discomfort in this, it's the discovery that we can be so needy, so consumed by one thing to the exclusion of anything else. And we certainly don't want anyone else to see us like this. How humiliating for others to see the precarious creatures we actually are. What a loss of dignity that is. If someone saw us like this, we could hardly be in their presence again, not just because they would think so little of us, but because as soon as we saw them, we'd be reminded of a place of need in ourselves we'd much rather suppress or forget. that it even exists. So true hunger may be the most basic of our human needs, but more often, though, for people like us, it's more of like a metaphor for other longings that can take over. For instance, we cannot neglect to acknowledge. I'm going to show this. Here's a thing, a report that I recently ran. We cannot neglect to acknowledge that when running a mission insight report on the 3-mile radius around our church, we find that at least 40% of the adults in this radius are single. A pretty even split, even between young singles in their early 20s to early 30s, and older singles in their late 50s to 80, and that almost 70% of the people in this large area, 40% single, have never been married. Can you imagine for so many in our community? Not all are concerned by this, but many. That hunger in them is like a yearn for a life partner. Their lives are good and full of so many rewarding accomplishments and relationships and experiences, but oftentimes, especially in the older of those two demographics, there becomes this like craving, this something not satiated, this craving to have a commitment, a relationship to build their life around, to shape meaning, to have a person to do a rhythm of life with throughout their days, to build some kind of legacy with. And as year follows year, and there's no genuine sign of there being any potential permanent relationship in their life, their plans for their career and their financial planning, which always had been kind of maybe provisional, now start to feel like they have this air of permanence to them. They wonder if they're just hanging out in all the wrong places, or if they've just been too choosy, and before they know it, the waiting takes a grip over their mind and their soul and becomes as convulsive as hunger does. Their radar screens can't help but flash. Can't help but flash sirens when it picks up nearby people in vibrant marriages, or designer children, or imagined happiness. And if they begin to avoid conversations with these people, lest their need to nurture their own grief turn into sharp words and inappropriate tears and blinding self-pity. And this is deep part of the loneliness epidemic in our area. Of course, these are only among the most intense of many profound yearnings that can't be assuaged by material comfort, right? Or professional accomplishment. Right now, 1 in 8 people are longing for a job. A great many more are yearning for a job that they can truly pursue with their heart and with their soul. And so all waiting is this kind of hunger. All hunger is this kind of waiting. You can fill up your life with good and worthwhile things, genuine and valuable tasks, absorbing and deserving projects. But suddenly, you just get moments when you see with piercing clarity that it's all been a distraction, all a way of making you so busy that you don't need to think about the one thing that you desire most. The thing you long for with your whole being and need like a hungry hole in your stomach. You can deal with waiting through distraction, through busyness, fluster, hurry, entertainment, but when all when all your distractions have expired, the waiting's still there for you, kind of gnawing at your soul. And this is where we find Israel today as we make it to the end of Nehemiah, waiting with this kind of hunger. If you'll remember, when we began this story, Israel was yearning to be rebuilt, stumbling out of exile in Babylon. Their kind of overactive hunger for prominence and autonomy placed them in exile, and their people scattered with no sense of home and subject to oppression and submission to empires not even remotely attuned to the way and rule and mercy and justice of God. And Israel is just so hungry, longing. Israel was hungry to be rebuilt, and so Nehemiah saw that need and believed that they had been built. I mean, it's Israel. They had been built different. They had been built different than all the other peoples, and knew that if reminded of who God had called them to be, they could be built anew. There could be new life, brick by brick, for the future that God had in store for them. A future that's built upon, marked by revisiting the value of God's word and promise in their lives. A future marked by rethinking the ordinary people involved in the work of building this kingdom, and believing that buried in those people was Israel's extraordinary future. A future built upon reimagining leadership altogether as not a set of skills or some prophetic message, but as this spirit-inspired thing, a hunger that was contagious from one spirit and one person to another person's spirit, something that could set the room ablaze. A future built upon this renewed compassion and rediscovery of the community right at their doorstep. Their call, making themselves present in the world like little booths, sukkahs set up at the threshold between their hunger and the world's great need. And so attending to their hunger to be rebuilt, to be renewed in their purpose, to become finally Tov as they should be. Nehemiah helps them do this. Nehemiah helps them. Chapters 1 through 6 are Nehemiah. We can put that on the screen. Yeah, thank you so much. But chapters 1 through 6, 1 through 7 helps them make this possible. Nehemiah prays and gains approval for the build and secures the resources and collects the building materials and recruits the workers and cares for and feeds these workers and defends the project in the face of opposition. And the temple's rebuilding is accomplished. The celebration commences. They've accomplished what they have set out to do. But I wonder if you noticed, as you read along, if you read along with us, what begins to unfold in the second half of Nehemiah. It turns out they got their heart's desire, everything they ever wanted or thought they wanted, but they're still so hungry. Like, yes, physically hungry, actually. They still have not escaped famine. But also, like, metaphorically hungry. They're still longing. This did not fill their longing. After the priest Ezra calls them to remember God's promise and faithfulness, and they confess their sin of forgetfulness of all that God has done, all the ways they doubted God's presence, to see them through, despite God's having always been with them and for them, even after this, and after signing a new covenant together and sealing the documents together, after inviting home all the Israelites still in Babylon to come and see and live within this beautiful place and to help them dedicate these new walls to God, we finally get to the very end of Nehemiah. And it feels like we're at the very beginning all over again. A slew of priests were sent to guard this place. Like there's an entire chapter just about the priests sent to guard this place and to steward the temple and to guard it, protect the holiest of things, the holiest of practices. But chapter 13, Nehemiah receives word that everything is wrong. Everything is in disarray. Some temple leaders aren't showing up for their post. Others have been thrown out by evildoers who have infiltrated the temple now because there's been no one consistent, diligent, no one with follow-through, vigilant enough to sort the weeds from the wheat and the goats from the sheep. And Nehemiah is angry. In chapter 13, we're left with Nehemiah's anger. It was Nehemiah who helped Israel open themselves up to the world all around them. He said you didn't have to fear the world anymore. He had welcomed their marriages with foreigners. He had helped feed not just their own, but feed the entire community of strangers at their doors. He empowered them to be among the community, which is not something that Israel was known to do, mingling amidst its brokenness and in order to still share good news with them, so long as they remain true to their God, committed to their purpose, and undistracted by what the world seemed to offer. But they lost their way so fast, so fast. And this is what Nehemiah says. Let's look at 13. Now before this, the priest who had appointed over the chambers of the house of God and who was related to Tobiah prepared for Tobiah a large room where they had previously put the grain offering and the frankincense and the vessels and the tithes of grain, wine, oil, which were given by commandment to the Levites, they are the priests, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the contributions for the priests. While this was taking place, I was not in Jerusalem, Nehemiah says. For in the 32nd year of King Xerxes of Babylon, I went to the king, and after some time, I asked leave of the king and returned to Jerusalem. I then discovered the wrong that had been done on behalf of Tobiah, preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. And I was very angry, and I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the room. Then I gave orders, and they cleansed the chambers, and I brought back the vessels of the house of God and the grain offering and the frankincense. And I also found out that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them, so that the Levites and the singers who had conducted the service had gone back to their fields. And so I remonstrated with the officials and said, "Why is the house of God so forsaken?" I gathered them together, and I set them in their stations. And then all of Judah brought the tithe of the grain and wine and oil into the storehouses, and I appointed as treasurers over the storehouses the priest and the scribe and Pedaiah of the Levites, and as their assistant, Hanan, son of Zakur, son of Mathi. This is why I don't read all of them. For they were considered faithful, and their duty was to distribute to their associates. Remember me, O God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds. This is Nehemiah saying, please don't forget all the good things I did. Don't forget chapters 1 through 7. In those days I saw in Judah people treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine and grapes and figs and all kinds of burdens which they brought to Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. They had forgotten the day. And I warned them at the time against selling food. I had told them that. Let's go down a little bit more. Did not your ancestors act in this way? And did not your God bring all this disaster on us and on the city? Yet you bring more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath, forgetting your way. We can go to the next slide. And I set some of my servants over the gates then to prevent any burden from being brought in on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come and guard the gates. And one of the sons, son of the high priest, was the son-in-law of Sanballat. I chased him away from me. Remember them, oh my God, because they have defiled the priesthood, the covenant of the priest and the Levites. Thus I cleansed them from everything foreign. It's so sad. And I established the duties of the priests and the Levites, each in his work, and I provided for the wood offering at appointed times and for the first fruits. And this is the last line of all of Nehemiah. Remember me, O God, for good, please. Sounds so desperate. Maybe this is what one saint in our community was getting at when we had that meeting last Sunday and about children's and youth ministry, and she said, yeah, we're not really great at follow through at Kingstowne. Not really great at consistency. That same Mission Insight report that I showed you of the singleness, we ran this other report too. You can't see it. You can't see it here. But I will tell you what it says. But the most important thing is to look on this side here, the green and the red. The first column of the green all the way down on both sides says moderately important. The second column says very important. And these are a bunch of various things that could be important. These are the same things they ask every person as they gauge interest in this area for churches to know how to be in ministry. These are the same things that every person is at. But look, in our area, 3-mile radius around this church, every single thing down the list is modestly important to everyone. That's abnormal. That's not normal. Addiction support groups, health and wellness programs, membership and leadership trainings, crisis support groups, family-oriented activities, adult social activities, involvement in social issues, mission trips and opportunities for volunteering and social justice and cultural programs and holiday programs and seniors ministries and singles and college age groups and all the way down the page. Everybody, 3-mile radius, has made it very clear that we think everything is important. And then the second column is what do we think is actually important, really important. And the list gets smaller. The list does get smaller. Not as many things are very important. They're all modestly important, right? And that long list of red over there is the back-to-back red is the section called Religious Spiritual Programs. And under that it says Bible and Scripture study, celebration of sacraments, contemporary worship experiences, online or virtual worship experiences, quality sermons, religious education for children, spiritual discussion groups, traditional worship experiences, warm and friendly encounters. The only two things, spiritual discussion groups and warm and friendly encounters are the two things that we still say, okay, yeah, I guess that's pretty important. Yeah. So it's not just us, thank God, right? So if the commentary is we are all just very distracted and very consumed and we don't really follow through well and there's lack of consistency at Kingstowne, I would say that is, we are a part of the zeitgeist of this. This is the reality of our area. We live in a society increasingly clothed in technology. Technology seduces us in ways that cause this to happen because it zeroes in on every single problem and frustration in the world in every possible way that we could address it. Struggling with your hip? Here's an artificial one. Not sure what clothes to pack for your trip to England? This app can tell you exactly what the weather's going to be like in Boston. Ready for dinner, not had time to do dinner. This oven can bake things straight from the freezer and not make them taste like frozen food. And also, you can have an app so that you can just bring dinner right to your door, right? Longing to be asked on a date. Here's an app with lots of interesting sounding lonely hearts, every one of which are emotionally available and astonishingly baggage-free, right? Once we've been accustomed to expecting technology to resolve the unfiltered and unresolved parts of our lives, waiting becomes even harder than it was before. It doesn't just seem distressing, it feels outrageous now to have to wait for anything, because surely someone, somewhere, must have invented a solution to this problem. And I'm interested in all the problems and all the solutions. We look around us and we see everyone else apparently finding all the solutions to their problems, and it makes our waiting seem even more monstrous. So often as not, We look to technology because even if it can't end our waiting, it can at least provide ever more sophisticated forms of distraction for us. After all, who needs to feel the pain of sitting by the bedside of a loved one if you can pick up like the remote control at the flick of a red button, be able to watch any one of anything on any service, chock full of passion and drama and skill and controversy that makes us think we would actually be good at sitting at a bedside with someone because we feel it's that real to us now. And Lord knows it's perfectly possible to turn our whole life into a distraction. A whole enterprise of stretching us wide instead of ever going deep into anything. This is what that says. That's what that the statistics say, that in this area, we are stretched so wide that we have so many interests in so many things, we actually have no interest in anything. We've prioritized so many things, we've prioritized nothing at all. Maybe that's what we've been doing lately. I don't know. It's what Nehemiah realized was happening there. They weren't tending to the things that were most important. It's good news for us, friends, then. Here's the good news. Here's the good news and where we're going to pivot today. It's good news for us, then, that the church has a season that's uniquely designed to help us set aside our distractions and get profoundly in touch with the powerlessness of waiting and not having problems and answers for everything. And that season is called Advent. Begins next Sunday. In Advent, it's this time where we dismantle all of our defenses for a few weeks, a few days, a few moments, and face squarely our deepest yearnings, what we actually want to put first and prioritize, our unresolved longings, our rawest needs. But Advent is also about a confidence that is deeper than our own needs, a hope that is so much more far-reaching than our own desires, a future that is bigger than all of those yearnings that are down deep in us. The future that was actually in store for Israel that they did not yet know. In our self-protection, we habitually say to ourselves, to one another, even to God, like, never mind the depth of commitment. Gosh, my calendar is so packed. I don't know if I can commit to that. Let's just do as much as we can. Go as wide as we can, and maybe nobody will notice that we've not done much of anything anywhere. Let's just make ourselves busy, and perhaps we'll forget about it. But in Advent, God says something else. God says, completely for this season, stop going wide. Your life is not about quantity of activity or length of days. Let go of going wide and find and feel the depth of life in this season. The answer to the agony of waiting isn't width, it is depth. The answer to every longing in our hearts is not putting more and more answers to that longing in the big pot, but going hard fast after the one thing that's going to fill it.